Welcome to Military Analytics. The Russian army is now on the path of losing its title as one of the strongest military forces in the world. Before the Ukrainian war, the Russian armed forces was considered the second best army in the world. But the powerful Western weapons in the Ukrainian army crushed the invincible weapons of the Russian army. US-made weapons played a huge role in this success of the Ukrainian army. High-level military equipment in the inventory of the U.S. Army was sent to Ukraine to support Kiev. The Washington administration has provided nearly $50 billion in military and humanitarian aid to the Ukrainians since the beginning of the war. A State Department data showed that Washington supplied Kiev with 1,600 Stinger anti-aircraft manpads, over 8,500 Javelin anti-tank systems, more than 700 Switchblade tactical drone systems, and 142 155mm squared howitzers. In addition, the rest of this list included in a wide range of military equipment, weapons, ammunition, and defense systems, including 36 105mm squared howitzers, 8 NASAMS air defense systems, 20 Mu-17 helicopters, and 45 T-72B tanks. In addition, the U.S. Department of Defense stated that it supplied 109 M2A2 Bradley heavy armored combat vehicles to Ukraine. A battalion M1 Abrams tank will be deployed on the Ukrainian fronts as soon as possible. These mostly American-made systems made the Ukrainian army superior to the Russian army on land. However, until now, Ukraine and Russia had not been able to achieve air dominance at the front. For this, the Ukrainian administration demanded powerful warplanes and air defense systems from the USA and the West. Ukrainian cities were still not fully protected against Russian missile retaliation. For this, the USA, UK, France, and Germany sent their powerful air defense systems to the Ukrainian army. Air defense systems such as NASAMS, IRIS, and Krytal have achieved a success rate of more than 95% against Russian missiles and UAVs. However, there was still no solution against Russia's hypersonic missiles. For this reason, the Kiev administration requested Patriot air defense systems from Washington. The Patriot air defense system has proven itself in many areas, but it has not fought against hypersonic missiles until now. While Moscow despised the Patriot air defense systems, the Ukrainian people placed high hopes on the Patriots. It recently achieved a historic success against the Russian army's most successful hypersonic missiles and warplanes. Russia launched a wave of missile and drone strikes in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, a day after 2 drones exploded near the Kremlin in Moscow. After a series of serial airstrikes and explosions in Russian cities such as Moscow, St. Petersburg, Crimea, Krasnodar, Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk. Last week, the Russian army carried out the heaviest missile strike of the war on Ukrainian cities. Ukraine's Western air defense successfully destroyed Russian kamikaze UAVs and missiles. The Russian army relied heavily on hypersonic missiles, but Patriot air defense systems proved to be the god of war. It was quite remarkable that the Russian Air Force used 47 missiles in its attacks in Kiev. This Kinzhal missile was fired from Russian soil by a MiG-31 of the Russian Air Force. But most of these Russian attacks were blocked by the Ukrainian air defense. Ukrainian forces recently confirmed that they had successfully shot down a Russian 47-meter-squared Kinzhal hypersonic missile over Kiev. The blocking of Kinzhal by the U.S.-designed MIM-104 Patriot surface-to-air missile system created a bombshell effect. In other words, the U.S.-made Patriot air defense system used by the Ukrainian armed forces has accomplished the impossible by shooting down the Russians' invincible missile Kinzhal. The U.S.-made Patriot air defense system achieved a first in history with its 100% success and hit rate against Russian hypersonic missile systems. This shocking news clarified earlier conflicting reports about whether one of the cutting-edge weapons had been destroyed. The announcement was made by the Ukrainian Air Force commander, Lieutenant General Mykola Oleksuk, who described the event as an historical event on the social media platform Telegram, if you remember. Putin, speaking when he introduced the council, claimed that the missile was unstable. 2 air defense systems. Of course, having such a missile provides serious advantages in the field of armed struggle. The power of this missile, as military experts say, can be enormous, and its speed makes it vulnerable to today's missile defense and air defense systems. But the Patriots, the U.S. air defense system used by the Ukrainian armed forces, completely broke this taboo. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat stated that the downing of Kin's hull was a slap in the face to Russia. After the downing of its most powerful missiles, the general situation and course of the Russian Air Force began to seriously come to the fore. Russian pilots failed to take much action to support their troops on the ground due to poor training and outdated equipment, according to a report by the top British think tank Royal United Services Institute. The report, released this week, outlined the strengths and weaknesses of Russia's Air Force in Ukraine based on a series of interviews with intelligence services, military experts, and Ukrainian Air Force commanders. Since Russia first invaded in February of last year, it was already known that one of its biggest failures in Ukraine was the failure of its pilots to provide dynamic, close air support to Russian units on the battlefield. But recent war reports have resurfaced. This situation supporting Russian ground troops required Russian pilots to fly at very low altitudes, according to the report. But very few Russian fixed-wing pilots had significant training or money for very low altitude, close air support in disputed airspace. Because this training in the basic Russian Air Force before the invasion never formed part of the duties of the Russian army. On top of that, it was clear that some Russian aircraft had known shortcomings with various sensors and weapons that did not allow them to effectively hit their targets. That is, Russia has not invested heavily in sensors, weapons, and pilot training, which the Western Air Force has acknowledged. After decades of anti-insurgency campaigns where air power provides most of the deployed joint force firepower, the Russian Air Force has not had success since the start of its invasion, mostly due to the flexibility of Ukraine's surface-to-air defense systems. It largely defended Ukraine's skies with its own systems until October 2022. But now, with Western-supplied weapons and defense systems, including US-Patriot and Stinger missiles, Ukrainian forces have largely secured their security. But despite all this, it is known that Russia has a significant number of aircraft in its inventory, and there is a lot of capacity left. Therefore, all countries should act in cooperation to give Ukraine as much air defense capability as possible. On the other hand, while Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues so badly with both the successful steps of the Ukrainian forces and the support of the US Western Europe to Kiev, some striking speculations continue to surround Russia, especially after Russia's downing of Kinsail missiles with Patriot systems used by Ukrainian forces. Rumors began to leak that Russian President Vladimir Putin would be overthrown with a close coup. The growing popularity of the war, combined with a sinking economy and the staggering death toll, helped fuel the idea that Putin would be forced out of power. According to military analysts, a coup d'état becomes a real possibility when the political situation changes and the country has a truly unpopular president at its head, and war is really undesirable. In fact, no clear information was shared to prove this situation. But Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine did not go well. In addition to the suffering inflicted on Ukraine, Russia has unleashed a number of natural problems upon itself. From a military, economic, and geopolitical point of view, the occupation deteriorated Russia's stance. It also profoundly changed the geopolitical landscape facing Moscow and Europe. Similarly, Russian equipment was destroyed. Estimates show that Russia has lost more than 9,000 combat vehicles, namely tanks and armored personnel carriers. And Russia's aggression has resulted in international condemnation, which is manifested in economic sanctions. The result was that the Russian economy was pushed into recession. In addition to the material damage suffered by Russia, this invasion decision also damaged the reputation of Moscow and Putin. And this situation has become a pariah in the eyes of the international community. It will take years, if not decades, to overcome the hostility that the war has generated against Russia due to international backlash. So given the disastrous outcome of the invasion so far, the environment is understandably ripe for coup d'état speculation. However, the probability of a coup still seems low, especially given that Putin is aware of the possibility. Last year, Putin fired more than 100 Federal Security Bureau agents to send a very strong message to those who oppose the war in Ukraine. Similarly, Putin placed the former leader of Russia's Fifth Service under house arrest. You can expect Putin to continue to take steps to reduce the likelihood of a coup. So for now, there is no change in power in Moscow. Maybe Putin can leave power when Russia has no more bullets to shoot than lose a very powerful missile like the Consul. But then everything would be too late for Russia. Ukraine's path to victory passes through the Pearl of the Black Sea. Crimea. Crimea is a key and has a decisive role in this war. Ukraine wants to open its doors to freedom using the Crimean Key. For this purpose, Ukraine is organizing many attacks on Russian positions in Crimea. The last of these was deployed to the second-largest Russian military airbase in the Crimea. So how did the Ukrainian attacks reach the Russian military airbase 240 kilometers from the front line in the Crimea? Unmanned aerial vehicles belonging to Ukraine managed to frighten Vladimir Putin by making a show of strength in the skies of Crimea. The last of these attacks occurred around 1620 local time in the airbase area in Gaverdiysk in Crimea, which was temporarily occupied by Russia last day. Mysterious Ukrainian weapons struck and blew up the military airbase 240 kilometers from Russia's front line in Crimea. Local residents reported that explosions were heard and seen again in the temporarily occupied Crimea, this time in the area of the military airbase in the urban-type village of Gaverdiysk in Simferopol district. According to local reports, first, a few explosions were heard, then black smoke appeared above the airbase. According to claims by Russian officials, Russian air defense systems hit the UAV. In addition, a large crater was allegedly found at the scene. The diameter of the crater is about 10 to 12 meters, and the depth is about 3.5. The military airbase in the village of Gaverdiysk received another incurable wound with the attacks by the mysterious vehicles of Ukraine. It is likely that the heroes who carried out this attack were bomb-laden drones when the bombs dropped from the drones hit the military airbase. Huge explosions occurred, and the skies of Crimea surrounded to the dark cloud. The Russian authorities have not yet made a statement regarding the casualties resulting from the attack. However, considering the ammunition and soldiers at the airbase, it is a strong possibility that there will be serious casualties. However, it was not specified from which direction the drone flew. Given that the aircraft has successfully covered such a long distance both from the borders of Ukraine and over the territory of Russia, Ukrainian drones cause serious concerns for Russian officials. The determined stance of the Kiev administration on Crimea is fueling a series of cross-border operations. In addition to the Gaverdiysk attack, Sevastopol and Bakhchisaroy near Yalta hosted explosions in Berkshire. The engineering warehouse of the military unit of the 758th Logistics Center of the Russian Federation Black Sea Fleet and the warehouse of the 133rd Brigade of the M2 were located. Ukrainian drones targeted these Russian ammunition depots. As a result of the missiles hitting, large clouds of smoke were seen in the skies of Bakhchisaroy. The explosion was so strong that the terrifying explosions were heard in many villages of Bakhchisaroy district. No official statement has yet been made regarding the casualties caused by the explosion. In addition, according to the claims of Russian state media, air defense systems shot down 6 unmanned aerial vehicles while electronic warfare systems disabled 4. The Russian Ministry of Defense, which is uneasy about the frequent flying of Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles over the skies of Crimea, attracted all the attention with its statements. In his official statement, the Russian defense minister stated that Ukraine is targeting the civilian infrastructure in Crimea and in the depths of Russia. The Ukrainian front did not remain indifferent to these statements. One of Zelensky's chief advisors, Mikhailo Podolyak, denied that Ukraine used drones to attack Russian territory. Writing on the Twitter social media platform, Podolyak said Ukraine is not attacking the territory of the Russian Federation. Ukraine is waging a defensive war to liberate all of its lands from occupation. In addition, Ukraine's Western allies deterred Ukraine from attacking targets in Russia to prevent the conflict from escalating. Mr. Podolyak's statement may reflect Kiev's attempt to maintain a degree of deniability in light of these Western concerns. At the beginning of the video, we asked you a question: can Ukraine open its doors to freedom using the Crimean Key? The answer to this question would most likely be yes, given the Kiev forces' operations in Crimea. So what strategies can Ukraine use to liberate Crimea? Let's consider these tactics together. To liberate Crimea means to make the peninsula untenable for the Russian army, navy, and air force. A large-scale offensive accompanied by precision strikes and shelling against Russian air, ground, and naval forces could help drive Putin's men out of Crimea. This concerto attack on the peninsula would be a major blow to Russia's morale to isolate and neutralize it and seriously damage its military infrastructure with long-range attacks in the absence of decisive war success. Elsewhere, The liberation of Crimea would mean an undisguised defeat for Moscow and could lead to the collapse of Russian forces on the ground and even the downfall of Putin. In addition, Kiev can isolate the omni-terrestrial communication line connecting Crimea to Russia using long-range precision strikes. Kerch Bridge connecting Crimea to Russia via Mariupol and Melitopol along the Azov Sea coastline. This bridge is very important in the land communication line. Targeting this transport infrastructure will initiate the isolation of Crimea from supplier movement. Let us remind you that the Kerch Bridge was severely damaged months ago. A large Ukrainian armored force attacking southeast in the direction of the Sea of Azov and penetrating the Russian linear defenses will complete the isolation of Crimea and enable the closer deployment of HIMARS rocket launchers, which will then be within range of key Russian installations in Crimea. Crimea is the size of Massachusetts. There is no place to hide. The location of all Russian facilities are well known. Russian facilities are open and vulnerable, while on the other hand, sensitive attacks on Sevastopol may force the Black Sea Fleet to relocate to Novorossiysk, which is much less capable as a base and is further away from Ukrainian cities. If Ukraine wants Crimea, it must make the Saki air base on the west coast of Crimea completely unusable. The logistics center in Tsonkawi in the north of Crimea should turn into a huge bonfire once Crimea becomes untenable. Ukrainian ground forces may begin to attack south to the Isthmus of Perekop and then to the wider Crimea. Special forces, Marines, unmanned systems are assets that will play an important role in Ukraine's Crimean operation. We touched upon the strategies that Ukraine will use to liberate Crimea. However, another detail that is as important as strategy in war is ammunition for the Crimean offensive. Ukraine needs long-range attack capabilities such as the Attack, a surface-to-surface missile with a range of 190 miles. The West will also need to provide other equipment that will allow the Ukrainians to deploy a large armored force capable of penetrating enemy lines without being blown up by mines or stranded in trenches dug by Russians. But there is no consensus among Western countries on providing Ukraine with long-range weapons. Few believe that Russia will resort to a tactical nuclear strike, but many worry that any weapon that could potentially be used by Ukraine to launch an attack inside Russia's territory could increase the risk of escalation and plunge other Western countries into a direct war. As a result, Zelensky realized that the Crimean Union must now be cauterized. Failure to retake the peninsula would mean an ongoing threat to Ukrainian state identity and global security. Zelensky continues to fight with all his might to destroy these threats. With Ukraine's determination to retake Crimea and Russia's insistence that it will defend it, it may only be a matter of time before this conflict turns into a battlefield reality. Russia continues its threats all over Europe and all over the world seas. With the start of the Ukraine war, almost the whole world turned against Russia. In return, Russia was expelled from all international societies except the UN and faced heavy economic sanctions. Nevertheless, Putin did not back down from his imperialist ideas, and the Ukrainian war is now in its second year. Putin played the energy trump card in retaliation against economic sanctions, but it didn't do much in the long run. Instead, he resorted to malicious solutions and once again proved to the whole world what a character he is. At the beginning of these steps, Putin cut oil and natural gas to Europe, although this retaliation plunged to Europe into a minor crisis. The energy crisis was overcome as a result of consultations. But the fact that Europe's power lines are connected to the North Sea and the Baltic Sea and the Russian presence in these seas brings to mind the questions of whether Russia will have an impact on the European energy network. To address this issue a little more, Russia's presence in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea dates back to the Cold War era. These seas where the Warsaw Pact applies remain the seas in which Russia continued to exist even after the dissolution of the pact. With the outbreak of the Ukrainian war, Sweden and Finland's process of joining NATO began, and Russia's presence, at least in the Baltic Sea, was somewhat undermined. NATO deployed its navy in the Baltic Sea against a possible Russian attack, together with Sweden and Finland, whose membership in NATO was negotiated. The NATO navy at least blocked Russian ships that wanted to cross the North Sea via the Baltic Sea. But Russia's presence in the North Sea still remains a major threat. After this, the Russian presence from the northern coasts of Europe became very noticeable. In addition, the open support of countries such as the Netherlands and Belgium on the North Sea coast to Ukraine pushed Russia to plan a series of deterrent actions in the North Sea. One of these actions was terminated before it even started. A Russian spy ship has been intercepted near wind farms in the North Sea off the Belgian and Dutch coasts, allegedly trying to cut off Europe's energy system. The ship was spotted entering Belgian and Dutch territorial waters in recent months before being spotted and escorted by the Dutch Coast Guard and Navy. Since then, both countries have warned of Russia's covert operation to map and prepare for acts of sabotage against Europe's energy infrastructure. In recent months, the sabotage that Russian actors sought to disrupt the organization of energy supply in the North Sea has not been successful. So what exactly is the purpose of this ship? According to a report from Dutch intelligence agencies, Russia secretly maps important infrastructures such as gas pipelines and wind farms in the North Sea before potential acts of sabotage. The detection of Russian ships in the North Sea, close to wind farms, underwater gas pipelines, and communication cables also caused panic among the Belgian authorities, who launched an investigation into the ship's activities. The ship was spotted in the Belgian North Sea in mid-November last year. While the presence of Russian ships in the North Sea was not denied, Belgium said it was closely monitoring the situation in the North Sea and its coasts in light of the conflict in Ukraine. The exact purpose of the Russian spy ship is unknown, but the Netherlands and Belgium need to protect, especially wind farms, gas pipelines, submarine data cables, and other critical infrastructure at sea. The maritime area is one of those most affected by the changes in the security environment in recent years, as the boundaries between internal and external security are blurred. More and more aspects that were not previously considered from a security policy perspective are being added. These include issues of energy security, trade and workplace protection, transnational crime, sabotage or information, and targeted impact on societies in cyberspace. In this context, the maritime domain has become more unstable and vulnerable to hybrid threats. The world seas are the scene of geopolitical rivalry globally. The competition between the USA and Russia is decisive regionally. More power rivalries can be observed with escalating tensions, for example, between Turkey and Russia in the Black Sea and the Middle East, or between Turkey, Greece, and Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean. At the same time, the marine environment offers strategic depth beyond territorial waters and an area below the water surface that is difficult to monitor even with state-of-the-art satellite exploration. So what exactly is aimed at in the Baltic? Threats to critical maritime infrastructure in the Baltic Sea region, potential disruption of vital sea lines, and the growing and sometimes provocative presence of troops are the main problems we face. Of concern in the Baltic Sea region are the critical marine infrastructure and sea lanes at sea and on the coast. In Germany, critical marine infrastructure has so far been the least integrated into government security concepts in ASHES, as it is predominantly privately operated. Infrastructure is the indispensable lifeblood of modern productive societies. This was highlighted by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg in Berlin in December 2022, when he praised the German-Norwegian initiative to improve underwater security, especially critical infrastructure, within the framework of the alliance. Since the first Russian submarine operations in 2015, the vulnerability of allied nations to cross-border naval infrastructures has played an important role in military planning. This includes the risk that outside powers could take control of this infrastructure, using it to subvert existing security concepts, thereby destabilizing individual nations and even the alliance as a whole. Thus, critical infrastructure becomes defense-related and the subject of military planning or protection needs. Recent acts of sabotage have enabled the issue to enter the political agenda and be discussed in public even before Russia's attack on Ukraine. There was a heart to attribute rise in hybrid activity. These include influencing groups and ideas in the information space, the use of drones throughout critical military and naval infrastructure, the escalation of Russian leadership's confrontational rhetoric against the West, and attempts to undermine European energy security. It is now clear that energy security, economic policy, and cyber and IT activities are increasingly intertwined with state and military security. The main psychological purpose of such activities is to frighten, disturb, and even destabilize Western European societies. Examples include the destruction of Norwegian submarine cables and sensors, drone flights over Swedish nuclear power plant, Norwegian military installations and energy infrastructure, and German military training sites, and the sabotage of Nord Stream 1 and 2. Attacks on these two pipelines have shown how vulnerable the sea areas and critical infrastructure are. However, this did not provide any impetus for closer cooperation between partners and allies in the Baltic Sea region in the maritime area. The German government wants to establish a regional maritime headquarters under the leadership of Germany. Such a command element was proposed to NATO in November 2020 as part of the so-called Baltic Maritime Coordination Function. At that time, this coordinating function was to provide a framework for regional activities in peacetime and emerging crises in the event of conflict or war. It would be handed over to one of NATO's 3 joint force headquarters based on the existing command and control structure. However, to date, the alliance has not taken a political decision on the proposal. But now competition within the alliance over the leadership role in the northern flank and the Baltic Sea, as well as the regional shape of military contributions, seems to hinder the implementation of the decisions taken. The future NATO membership of Sweden and Finland once again underlines the theme of regional cooperation and leadership. While accession would extend the NATO-Russia common border by approximately 1,340 kilometers, it would also provide an opportunity to significantly constrain Russia's maritime capabilities in the subarctic region through NATO-owned defense and influence systems. While Sweden and Finland are preparing for NATO membership, Scandinavian countries want to revive and intensify their defense cooperation within the framework of Scandinavian defense cooperation. In addition to expanding joint capabilities and structures, the resurgent Nordic defense cooperation will primarily focus on joint defense planning and preparations to conduct joint operations. Against this background, Germany and its allies in the wider Baltic Sea region are seeking a permanent presence in the North and Baltic Seas. The termination of Russia's presence in these seas will also affect the course of the Ukrainian war in favor of Ukraine. So what you think about this issue? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.